we give some background, but first I want to say to my Dutch trainers from the police departments and from police teaching and the military, and of course our friends from medicine, Ruben of course, and his colleagues, thank you for listening. And then Dworkis, I talked about his book, and we talked about his book many times, The Emergency Mind. Right, and all of you are listening to his podcast, and now we have opportunity to do a little talk. And before that, I'm Erik Hein. I'm working for a lot of organizations nowadays as a psychologist, and for police, military, and for emergency medicine. And my colleague Ruben introduced me to the absolute wonderful world of emergency medicine on the ambulance, of which I had no idea at all. And oh my God, it was such a roller coaster, learning all those abbreviations and all those heavy stuff, because at the police we just chased, like how do you call it, boeven, we just chased bad guys. But now Ruben is doing all those dangerous things with lives on the edge and on the streets and everywhere. So thank you, Ruben. Maybe you can also give a little introduction to yourself, Ruben. He's freezing right now.
It's freezing, yeah.
He's freezing already. Come on, Ruben, perform under pressure. It has to be done now.
Oh, sorry, the Wi-Fi was not that good over here, but I have to introduce myself. I'm Ruben. I'm an ambulance nurse and educator for the European Resuscitation Council, and I do a lot of work together with Erik on performance under pressure. I think it's the next level in training. Of course, it is nice to train in a nice environment, but our work on the ambulance is not in a nice environment always. So I think the next link, the missing link in education is also to perform and train under pressure. And that's why I like your work then. And what I saw in my work, I train a lot, but I wasn't trained to perform under pressure. And of course, I'm 23 years in the emergency medicine now, but still, I learned it myself. But I think it's good to have projects like this to learn from each other and to learn to perform under pressure. And I compare it always with sports. To take a penalty, it's very easy to do that on a training, but with a full stadium and the whole country looking at you is different. And that's what it is, and also in our work. So I think the world is small. I think we have to share the knowledge because it's growing, and like I said, that's why I like your work very much.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think it's worth saying out loud what an amazing world it is we live in. Erik, you and I were talking about this before we got started, that we can sit down on this conversation like this and just like dig into it from different angles. I also really appreciate that we seem to all be wearing the same shirt and have the same haircut, despite coming from very different sets of places. So I didn't realize that was the uniform of people that think about this stuff, but I'm happy to be part of that club and to be joining y'all today.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, maybe let's start with a question which sounds so obvious, but is I'm wrestling with a lot. That is, what is performance under pressure, and what's the difference, for example, with stress? And because I found out that within the police, but within military, and also in working with Ruben, that there are different people think different about it. So, for example, we can give a lot of tools for acute pressure, like self-regulation, breathing tools, and so on. But on the other side, there was recently a paper from the anesthesia, I'm not sure, implementing human factors in anesthesia, where it was told that you can better change the organization, or you can better make a better workplace design instead of, work on individual self-regulation. So that's one thing. Should we focus on the individual and his coping strategies? And also, what is pressure for a doctor? I mean, I asked my wife and she said, it's not always the acute pressure. Of course there is, but she sometimes cannot sleep because she has given medicines of which she thinks later from, is this a good medicine? Sure. What does the family think about? Well, and so on and so on. So what are we talking about?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think there's lots of different approaches to it. There's certainly the stress and pressure of operating within a particular moment, right? And that moment might have a couple characteristics to it, right? So, usually when I think about some version of this is asking the question, what is an emergency, right? Because it's different in different groups, but it's worth sort of like sketching that out. So we tend to think about impact, right? Like there's a high impact to what you do. Sometimes that's life or limb. Sometimes that's catastrophic loss or failure. There's uncertainty. There's not an obvious question or an obvious answer. There is pressure, which is sort of what we're getting at, but usually it's a mismatch between supply and demand. Like you need more of something than you have, and that something is often, but not always, time, right? Like you wish you had more time to solve the problem. Maybe it's more information to solve the problem, but you don't have everything you need. And sometimes that's just a factor of like, there's an exploding sense to it, right? If you don't act immediately, it decompensates, falls off a cliff, and becomes a different problem set. Those were the three I started with when I started thinking about what an emergency is. And over time, I've actually added two more to that list, right? So one is complexity, right? I think emergencies are complex systems. They're not complicated systems. They're almost always never complicated. They're actually complex, which means you have multiple interacting parts with nonlinear interactions to them. The human body is a complex system, not a complicated system. Group dynamics are complex systems, right? If you look at it from, my friends and teammates in the military, right? Like you're approaching an unstable environment. That's a complex system. There are lots of parts that interact with each other in ways you can't necessarily predict. And then the last piece is this sense of, and I think this gets to what pressure and stress is, of liminality, right? There's a sense that once you're in this space, there's no way out but through. You can't easily reverse back out of it, right? You have launched a plane. That plane has to come back down to the earth in one way or another, hopefully safely and calmly and not in a fiery wreck, right? But whatever it is, you can't just undo launching the plane, right? So I think emergencies, I think when we're talking about stress and pressure, we're talking about that, right? Uncertainty, high stakes, limited resources, complexity, and liminality. And that's a pretty rough working definition. And I think like your wife is right. Not all situations in medicine hit that by any stretch of the imagination.
No.
We do a lot of stuff that doesn't have some or all of those components. But when you get that magic secret sauce of all of them, that's hard, right? That requires thought and effort and training.
And then before I ask Ruben to comment on that, because I'm trying to build a model as a teaching model, like my friends Jeff Quayle and Terry Waller did in reality-based police training. So we have stressors and we have the stress response to make it digestible. And can we say then that these elements you talked about, these are stressors, which giving rise to a stress response, like cognitive bandwidth.
Yeah, although I guess, so I would say a tentative yes to that, because I'd want to think about a little bit more deeply the fact that we typically think of stress as bad and degrading performance, right? And sometimes some of these factors actually nudge you towards better performance if you're harnessing them. So I would argue that the liminality piece of it is a pretty crucial piece of designing an appropriate response. Like once I realize I'm in a liminal space, the tools, the tactics, the way I think can change to reflect that. I don't know that that's better or worse. And I think being committed, like there's who is it, the pirate Blackbeard or something that lit his own ships on fire to take over the enemy ships, right? He has committed his troops to a path of action. There is a utility in committing to a path and being on a path that you can't easily reverse. In some sense, that focus helps you. I cannot recommend burning your ships, right? But like, you know what I mean? So I'm just not sure it's so simple.
So this is the mental model of the stress performance curve. Like we can use it. It's also a friend. It's our friend.
I think that there is some of that in there, that there's an optimal amount of stress to perform under, and acknowledging the limits of that certainly frees you from some analysis paralysis, right? Like if you realize you're never going to achieve more than X amount of certainty, then you're freeing, in a sense, yourself up to operate in different ways. Like there's a bit of a paradoxical calm that comes with that in a lot of spaces. But yeah, to a first order approximation, sure, these are the facts that make it hard to do what we do.
Ruben, would you like to comment on that? What performance under pressure for you and your work is?
Yeah, nice things said already. I think the pressure in emergency medicine is, I think, also the environment, and also not every person is the same. Like Michael Phelps or Usain Bolt, both go different with pressure. Usain Bolt need the public. Michael Phelps closes himself off. So there's no one way to deal with pressure. And also, I think also in training, so a difficulty in this subject. And also for myself, sometimes I feel pressure, and in the same situation, I don't feel any pressure. So it's highly dependable on some personal facts. So that makes it difficult, and also to make models for. How do you think about that?